The Caldrenic scout ship drifted dead in space, venting plasma from a wound in its hull, and every instinct in Fleet Commander Elena Voss's body told her to finish it off. Her tactical officer's voice cracked through the bridge speakers. "Commander, that ship fired on us first. We have a clean shot, one volley and it's over." Voss stared at the screen, at the crippled vessel tumbling end over end against the black. 30 seconds ago it had tried to kill her crew. Now its engines were dark, its weapons silent, its crew almost certainly dying inside a hull that wasn't built to survive what her ship had just done to it. "Stand down," she said. The bridge went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when people think their commander has lost her mind. "Commander," her XO started. "I said stand down. Divert power to the tractor beam. We're bringing them in, and we're offering them medical aid." Nobody moved for a full 3 seconds. Then hands returned to consoles because that was what training did to people, even when their gut screamed otherwise. Voss watched the wreck grow larger on the screen and told herself this was the right call, the only call, even as some cold part of her wondered what she was about to let onto her ship. 600 kilometers away, aboard the Dominion command vessel Threnody of Ash, Overseer Threknal Voss received the report with something close to disbelief. "Say that again," he said. His communications officer, a younger Caldron with pale scale ridges that hadn't yet darkened with age, repeated himself. "The humans captured our scout crew alive, Overseer. They are treating the wounded. They have made no demands. No prisoner broadcasts. No executions." Threknal's claws tightened on the armrest of his command chair. In 300 years of Dominion conquest, he had never heard of an enemy doing this. Enemies killed prisoners to send a message or kept them to extract information or paraded them as trophies. Nobody simply helped them, not unless they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. "They're weak," he said, and the word settled something in his chest, made the universe make sense again. "They don't have the will to finish what they start. This will make our conquest easier, not harder." His science officer, an older Caldron named Osara who had survived 4 campaigns and rarely spoken less certain, cleared her throat behind him. "Overseer, there is a precedent for this behavior in the Deep Archive. I would advise caution before we—" "The Deep Archive is superstition," Threknal snapped. "Ancient stories to frighten hatchlings." "We are not hatchlings, Osara. Prepare the invasion fleet. If the humans won't fight for their own prisoners, they certainly won't fight for their homeworld." Osara said nothing more. But later, alone in the archive vault 3 decks down, she pulled a file that had not been opened in over 400 years. The header was a single phrase in the old tongue, one that predated the Dominion's written records by centuries. "The quiet ones. Do not mistake their silence." The rest of the file was redacted, black lines through every line of text except one, left untouched as if someone centuries ago had wanted it to survive. "They showed mercy once. It was not weakness. It was the last thing we ever regretted learning." Osara stared at the words for a long time before she closed the file and told no one. On Earth, the debate was louder and far less private. "You let them live," said Counselor Draven, slamming a hand on the table hard enough to rattle the water glasses. "An alien warfleet is bearing down on this planet, Commander Voss, and your first act as border defense was to nurse their wounded." "Their wounded were unarmed and dying," Voss said. "Killing them would have changed nothing about the fleet coming. It would only have proven to that fleet exactly what kind of enemy we are." "And what kind is that?" "The kind that doesn't need to prove anything by executing helpless people." The council chamber erupted into overlapping arguments, and Voss let it wash over her, because she had made her decision 6 hours ago, and arguing about it now wouldn't change what was already done. What worried her wasn't the council. It was the report sitting unread on her personal terminal, flagged urgent by Dr. Amara Chen down in xenolinguistics. She left the chamber mid-session, ignoring the calls behind her, and found Chen in a lab lit blue by 3 dozen monitors, each one running fragments of decrypted Caldronic communication. "You need to see this," Chen said without looking up. She was younger than Voss, sharp-eyed, the kind of person who forgot to sleep when a problem interested her enough. I've been running their historical broadcasts, the ceremonial ones, the stuff their culture repeats to itself. There's a phrase that keeps recurring. It doesn't translate cleanly, but the closest I can get is, the quiet ones. Meaning? I don't know yet. But it's old, Commander. Older than anything else in their archive, and every single time it comes up the tone shifts. Fear. Real fear. If Kaldronic vocal patterns mean what I think they mean. Chen finally looked up, and there was something unsettled in her expression. Whatever this is, it predates first contact by a long way. Centuries, maybe more. And I don't think it's a myth to them. I think it's a memory. Voss felt the same cold weight settle into her stomach that she'd felt watching that scout ship drift, dying, in the dark. Keep digging, she said. Quietly. I don't want this in the council briefing yet. Why not? If it's useful, because I don't know what it means either. And until I do, I'm not handing the council a mystery to panic over. Voss turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Amara, good work. She didn't see Chen's face fall slightly at being dismissed, already turning back to keep pulling threads out of the dark. 3 days later, the Dominion invasion fleet crossed the outer marker of human space. 41 warships, more firepower than Earth's entire defense grid could theoretically withstand, led by Threknal Voss's flagship at the front, exactly where a conqueror's ship belonged. Threknal stood on his bridge and watched the marker light blink from amber to red, signaling entry into hostile territory, and felt nothing but satisfaction. The humans hadn't reinforced their border. They hadn't evacuated in force. Scans showed minimal defensive posturing, as if the species genuinely believed restraint alone might save them. Pathetic, he murmured. Osara, signal the fleet. We proceed as planned. Lead ship first, full formation behind. Overseer, Osara said carefully. Sensors are showing an anomaly ahead. Some kind of distortion right at the threshold. Debris, ignore it. The lead ship, the Vengeance's Herald, surged forward into human territory, 40 other warships falling into formation behind it, and for exactly 4 seconds everything proceeded precisely as Threknal expected. Then the Vengeance's Herald was simply gone. No explosion, no wreckage, no debris field, no distress call, no weapons fire on any sensor band the Dominion possessed. One moment 800 crew and a warship built to level cities occupied that point in space. The next moment there was nothing there at all, as if the void itself had reached out and swallowed it whole. The bridge fell into a silence far more total than any Threknal had heard in his career. Osara, he said very quietly. Tell me what just happened to my ship. Osara stared at her console, at readings that made no sense, that matched nothing in any Dominion database. Overseer, she said, and for the first time in 400 years her voice shook. I don't think that was the humans. Kalen Reyes was 17 when the evacuation order came, and he spent the last hour on his homeworld standing in the doorway of a house he would never see again, trying to memorize the smell of it. The colony of New Halden had 6 hours warning. 6 hours to decide what to save from a lifetime. 6 hours to get 8,000 people onto transports built for 4,000. 6 hours before the Dominion Vanguard would reach orbit and turn the sky to fire. Kalen's mother had grabbed the photo albums. His father had grabbed nothing, just stood in the kitchen with his hands shaking, until Kalen physically pulled him toward the door. They made the last transport by 11 minutes. New Halden did not survive the day. Kalen watched it happen from the observation deck of the refugee ship. A silent gray dot of a planet lit up from below in slow, terrible blooms of orange, and somewhere behind him he heard someone say the words that would follow him for the rest of his life. This is what her mercy bought us. He didn't know then who her was. He would learn soon enough. The council chamber had not been this loud in years. 11 colonies evacuated without a shot fired in their defense, Councillor Draven said, reading from a list like it was an indictment, which in his voice it was. 3 of them destroyed anyway, Voss's doctrine of restraint isn't saving lives, it's delaying the inevitable while we hand the Dominion every advantage. Voss stood at the head of the table, jaw tight, hands folded behind her back the way she'd learned to stand when she needed the room to not see her hands shake. The doctrine isn't restraint for its own sake. It's a calculated to do what? We have refugees screaming for answers, Commander, and you won't even explain to this council what you're calculating. She couldn't. That was the problem. Everything she knew came from Chen's half-finished research, and a gut feeling she couldn't yet justify with evidence, and she was not going to stand in front of a frightened council and tell them Earth's survival strategy was built on a hunch about an alien myth. Give me time, she said instead. The fleet that lost its lead ship at the border hasn't advanced in 3 days. Something is holding them back. I intend to find out what, and I intend to use it. And if you're wrong, then I'll have been wrong doing everything I could to avoid killing people who hadn't yet tried to kill us. I can live with that outcome, Counselor. I don't think I could live with the other one. The chamber didn't erupt this time. It just went cold, and Voss understood that cold far better than she understood shouting. Shouting meant people still believed persuasion was possible. Cold meant they'd already decided, and were only waiting for the right moment to act on it. Chen hadn't slept in 2 days, and it showed in the wreckage of coffee cups around her station. But her eyes were bright when Voss found her again. I found something, Chen said. It's not much. It's a fragment, corrupted, buried under about 6 layers of Caldrenic religious encryption I had to basically guess my way through. But I think I got a name. A name for what? Chen turned her monitor around. On it was a jagged section of ancient Caldrenic script, half degraded, translated beneath in Chen's own careful annotations. Voss read it twice before the meaning settled. In the era before the Dominion's first calendar, the Caldron people warred against a species from the dying world called Terra Prima. The war ended not in Caldrenic victory, nor in Caldrenic defeat, but in Caldrenic mercy given by an enemy who had already won. Terra Prima, Voss said slowly. That's Latin. That's Amara. That's not a coincidence. I know. Chen's voice was tight, controlled in the way people get when they're trying very hard not to sound as unsettled as they feel. The timeline doesn't work, Commander. Caldrenic records date this conflict at roughly 900 years ago, using their calendar conversion. 900 years ago, humanity didn't have space travel. We barely had electricity in most of the world. So either their history is wrong, or ours is. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Outside the lab window, Earth turned slowly beneath them, blue and green and utterly ordinary, keeping whatever secrets it had kept for 900 years exactly as well as it always had. I need to talk to Fleet Intelligence, Voss finally said. There's a division I've heard whispers about. Black budget, no oversight, answers directly to nobody I've ever been able to identify. If anyone on this side of human space has answers about something this old, it's them. You think they'd tell you? I think, Voss said, that after what just happened at the border, they're going to have to. Threknal Voss had not slept either, though sleep was not something his species required the way humans did. What he had instead was 3 days of mounting, gnawing wrongness that refused to resolve into anything he could act on. His science teams had run every scan available. The point in space where the Vengeance's herald vanished showed no residual radiation, no gravitational scarring, no trace of weapons discharge. It was as if the universe had simply declined to have a warship there anymore. Overseer, Osara said, approaching his chair with the particular caution of someone bringing news they knew he wouldn't want. I have cross-referenced the disappearance pattern against the Deep Archive. There are 2 prior recorded incidents matching this signature. Both occurred during the war era referenced in the Terra Prima fragments. I told you to stop reading superstition into instrument failure. It is not instrument failure, Overseer. I have run diagnostics 11 times. Whatever took the herald is real, and it is patient, and it did not so much as scratch the paint on any other ship in the fleet. It took exactly 1 vessel and left every other target completely alone. Osara hesitated. That is not how a weapon behaves, Overseer. That is how a warning behaves. Threcknell turned to look at her fully for the first time since the incident, and something in her expression, some crack in the professional calm she always wore, made him actually consider what she was saying instead of simply dismissing it. A warning from whom? I don't know, but I know the humans didn't fire a single shot in their own defense at that border. And I know their ground forces didn't fire on us during any of the 11 colony evacuations, and I know every strategic model in this fleet's databanks says a species that behaves this way should already be broken. Osara's voice dropped. They are not broken, Overseer. They're waiting. Waiting for what? I don't know that either, but I would very much like to find out before we commit the rest of the fleet forward. Threcknell was quiet for a long moment, staring at the starfield on the main view screen, at the black emptiness where his flagship's sister vessel had simply ceased to exist 4 seconds after crossing an invisible line. Prepare a reconnaissance strike, he finally said. Small force, minimal exposure. I want eyes on whatever is guarding that border, and I want it before the council back home starts asking why my fleet has been sitting still for 3 days doing nothing. And if the reconnaissance force meets the same fate as the Herald? Threcknell's claws tightened once against the armrest, the only sign of the fear he would never admit to feeling. Then we'll know it isn't random, he said. We'll know it's choosing. The reconnaissance strike launched 6 hours later. 5 ships, fast and lightly armed, sent forward under strict orders to observe and retreat at the first sign of danger. 4 of them came back. The 5th simply wasn't there anymore. Its absence marked by nothing but silence on the comm channel where its captain's voice should have been, cut off mid-sentence in the middle of routine confirmation, as if something had reached out, made a choice, and closed a hand around exactly 1 ship out of 5 without so much as a flicker on anyone else's sensors. Threcknell stood on his bridge staring at the empty space on the tactical display where a warship's icon should have been, and for the first time since the invasion began, Overseer Threcknell Voss felt something he had never once felt in 300 years of conquest. He felt hunted. The man who walked into Voss's office didn't knock, didn't announce himself, and didn't wait to be offered a seat. Admiral Esau Cade, he said, dropping into the chair across from her desk like he owned the room. You've been asking questions you're not cleared to ask, Commander. Lucky for you, I've been waiting 3 days for someone to ask them. Voss studied him. Older than her, gray at the temples, a face that had the stillness of someone who had trained himself not to react to anything. His uniform bore no fleet insignia she recognized. I don't know who you are, she said, or what division you belong to. Good. That means the system's working. Cade set a data slate on her desk, screen dark. You found something in the Caldronic archive. A word, terra prima. Voss went very still. That information wasn't broadcast anywhere. It wasn't supposed to be. Dr. Chen's search queries tripped a flag that's been sitting dormant in the Deep Space Monitoring Network for longer than either of us have been alive, Commander. I'm not here because I read a report. I'm here because a system a lot older than the fleet you command woke something up when she found that name. What system? Cade didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment, weighing something, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost its casual edge. What I'm about to tell you isn't in any history book, and it's not going in one after this conversation either. Do you understand? No, but go on anyway. That earned the ghost of a smile. Good answer. Cade activated the slate, and an image bloomed across the screen. Grainy, ancient, clearly reconstructed from fragments too old to have been recorded with modern equipment. It showed the Earth, but wrong somehow. Continents unfamiliar. Ice sheets in places Voss had never seen them. 900 years ago is when the Caldronic calendar places their war against Terra Prima, Cade said. Human history has no record of a war like that, because human history, as it's taught in every school on this planet, was rewritten. Deliberately. By the people who survived it. Rewritten how? You can't just erase a war. You can if the alternative is worse. Cade's jaw tightened. 900 years ago, humanity fought something. Not the Caldron. Something older. Something that came before them. That the Caldron themselves feared enough to bury their own records of it. We don't know everything about what happened. What we do know is that humanity won. And when it was over, the people who led that war made a choice. Bury it. Let the species heal without the weight of what it had done, and build systems, dormant, self-sustaining, almost impossible to detect, that would only reactivate if the same threat, or something like it, ever came again. Voss's mouth had gone dry. The disappearing ships. Are those systems waking up? Cade confirmed. Slowly, carefully, exactly the way they were designed to. One ship at a time, minimal footprint, maximum message. It's not attacking the Dominion fleet, Commander. It's testing them, giving them every chance to turn around before it decides they won't. And if they don't turn around? Cade's expression didn't change, but something in his voice did. Then Overseer Threknal Voss is going to learn exactly why his own people buried the memory of us so deep, they forgot it was true. Threknal received the intelligence report from his interrogation team an hour before dawn cycle, and it told him almost nothing he wanted to hear. The captured human scout, a low-ranking supply officer taken during a border skirmish, more frightened than useful, knew nothing about Terra Prima, nothing about disappearing warships, nothing beyond her own small role in a war she clearly hadn't been briefed on any better than Threknal had. But she'd said one thing, almost by accident in the middle of a sentence about her family, that Threknal couldn't stop turning over in his mind. "You people keep asking why we're not scared of you," she'd said. "You should be asking why we're being so careful with you instead." Threknal stood over the interrogation feed long after the session ended, replaying that line, hearing it differently each time. "Overseer." Osara's voice behind him, careful as always now. "I've completed the analysis you requested, cross-referencing the disappearance signatures against everything in the deep archive that survived the redaction. And there's a pattern. Every disappearance has occurred at the exact boundary of what our own maps mark as human sovereign territory. Not one incident inside it, not one incident outside it. Whatever this is, Overseer, it isn't guarding the humans out of aggression. It's guarding a line, a very old line, drawn by someone who did not want it crossed again." Threknal turned to face her fully. "Someone. Not the humans. I don't believe the humans built this, no. I believe—" Osara hesitated, choosing her next words with visible care. "I believe the humans may not fully understand what it is either, Overseer. Their tactical response patterns don't match a species in control of a weapon this precise. They look like a species that knows something is protecting them, and doesn't entirely know what or why. That, more than anything else, unsettled Threknal. An enemy who knew their own strength was predictable. An enemy who didn't fully understand the thing standing behind them was not predictable at all. Pull the fleet back to the staging point," he said. "No further advances until I have answers. The Dominion Council will not be pleased with further delay, Overseer." "The Dominion Council," Threknal said, "is not the one who watched 2 ships disappear into nothing in the space of 3 days. Let them send someone out here to explain to me why I should ignore that." Kalen Reyes stood in a converted cargo hold that had, until 6 hours ago, been an ordinary storage bay, and now held something he didn't have words for. Admiral Cade had personally selected him, pulled his file from 11,000 refugee applications, and flagged it for reasons nobody had explained, and told him only that his aptitude scores and his personal stake in this war made him useful for something bigger than standard fleet service. The device in front of him didn't look like fleet technology. It looked older somehow, despite being built from materials Kalen didn't recognize, its surface etched with patterns that reminded him, uncomfortably, of the burn scars still healing on his own arm from New Halden's final hours. "This," Cade said, "is a fragment of something that's been sleeping under Earth's oceans for 900 years. We've only recently learned how to interface with it safely. You're going to help us learn faster." "Why me?" Cade studied him for a long moment. "Because you lost something the Dominion took and you didn't come out of it wanting revenge. You came out of it wanting to understand. That's rarer than you think, and it's exactly what this technology seems to respond to." He gestured to the console. Put your hand on the interface plate. Just your hand, nothing more. Kalen hesitated only a second before he did it. The moment his palm touched the surface, the entire room's lighting shifted, every screen in the bay flooding with symbols that scrolled too fast to read, and somewhere deep in the hull of the ship, a low hum began to build, a sound Kalen felt in his chest more than heard with his ears. Cade's expression, for the first time since Kalen had met him, showed something close to alarm. "That's not supposed to happen that fast," Cade said, already moving toward the comm panel. "Get me Fleet Command. Tell them the array just went active 3 systems ahead of schedule." Behind them, the ancient device pulsed once, twice, and then began broadcasting a signal into the dark. A signal humanity had not sent in 900 years, aimed directly at the heart of Dominion space. The signal reached the Dominion homeworld 11 hours later, and every listening station that intercepted it went silent in exactly the same way, as if something in the transmission itself demanded silence before anyone dared to speak about it. Osara was the one who decoded it, alone in the dead hours of ship cycle when Threknal was resting. She had run the pattern through 6 different translation matrices before she found the one buried deep enough in the archive to match it. A dialect so old, it predated the Dominion's current written language by roughly 900 years. The translation, when it finally resolved, was 3 words long. "We remember you." She sat with that for a long time before she woke the overseer. Threknal read the translation twice, his claws motionless on the console, and for once said nothing at all. "There's more," Osara said quietly. "I cross-referenced the transmission's origin coordinates against our oldest maps. Overseer, this signal came from Earth, specifically from beneath one of their oceans. There's a structure down there buried that predates every satellite record we have of that system. It's not human construction in the way we understand human technology. It's older, far older than their civilization should be capable of producing. Then who built it? I don't know. But I know the Terra Prima war record says humanity didn't build the weapon that ended that war either. They inherited it. Something was left behind on their world, long before their species existed in a recognizable form, and at some point in their history, they learned to use it." Osara hesitated. Or it woke up and chose to let them. Threknal stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars in a silence that stretched long enough to make even Osara uncomfortable. "Bring me everything the Deep Archive has on the Terra Prima War," he finally said. "Everything. I don't care how badly it was redacted. I want to know exactly what happened to us the last time we made this mistake." Aboard Earth's flagship, the mood was very different, and far more fractured. "You activated an alien superweapon without Council authorization," Draven said. And this time his voice wasn't loud, it was cold, which frightened Voss far more than his shouting ever had. "A 17-year-old refugee with no security clearance put his hand on something none of us understand, and it just broadcast a message to our enemy's homeworld. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I didn't authorize that test," Voss said. "Admiral Cade's division operates outside my command structure. I only learned about it after the fact, the same as you." "Then who does authorize it? Who is Cade answerable to, Commander, because it certainly isn't this council. And if it isn't us, I want to know who is currently making decisions that could get every person on this planet killed." Voss didn't have an answer, and the silence that followed told the room everything it needed to know about how little control anyone actually had. Later, in a private corridor away from the chamber, Cade found her waiting with an expression that told him she was done accepting half-truths. "You're going to tell me everything now," Voss said. "Not the sanitized version. Everything. Because I just stood in front of the council with no answers, and I am not doing that again." Cade studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying a long time. 900 years ago, he said, something came to Earth. Not an invasion, an arrival. A vessel, ancient even then, carrying something inside it that our ancestors didn't understand and couldn't have fought if they'd tried. It didn't attack them. It waited, watched, and over generations, it began to change the people closest to it. Not their bodies, their instincts. made certain traits stronger: patience, restraint, the capacity to hold immense power and choose again and again not to use it unless there was no other option left. That's not possible. I didn't say I understood it, Commander. I said it happened. What we do know is that eventually, the Cauldron's ancestors found Earth first, long before the modern Dominion existed, and they did exactly what Threknal Voss is doing now. They saw a species that didn't fight back immediately, and they mistook it for weakness. They pushed, and when Earth finally responded, it wasn't with an army. It was with that thing in the ocean, and every version of the story that survived the redaction agrees on one detail: it didn't destroy the invading fleet. It could have. It chose not to. It let them go, broken and afraid, on the condition that they never come back. And they didn't. Until now. Until now, Kate agreed. Somewhere in the last 900 years, the Dominion forgot why that boundary existed. Threknal's people buried the memory so deep even their own government doesn't fully believe it anymore. That's the danger, Commander. Not that they're strong, that they've forgotten what happens when this planet finally stops being patient. Voss was quiet for a long moment. And Kalen, what happens to him now that he's connected to it? Something shifted in Cade's expression, a flicker of guilt he didn't bother hiding. I don't know yet. The interface has never activated that fast for anyone we've tested. Either he's simply compatible with it in a way we don't understand, or... He stopped himself. Or what? Or it's been waiting for someone like him specifically, and I don't yet know what that means for what happens to him next. Kalen didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the symbols scrolling behind his eyelids, patterns that felt less like alien text and more like something already familiar, buried somewhere in the back of his own mind, waiting to be remembered rather than learned. He found Dr. Chen in her lab in the small hours, the only other person on the ship still awake, and sat down across from her without being invited. "Does it ever stop?" he asked. "Whatever this is. Do you know if it's permanent?" Chen looked up from her monitors, and for once her expression wasn't scientific curiosity. It was plain human concern. "I don't know, Kalen. Nobody does. You're the first person it's responded to like this." "Why me? I'm nobody. I'm a refugee kid Kate pulled out of a processing line." "Maybe that's exactly why." Chen turned her chair to face him fully. "Every piece of the old records agrees on one thing. Whatever's down there responds to something in a person, not a rank or a bloodline. Something about how you carry what happened to you. You lost everything at New Halden, and you didn't come out the other side wanting to burn the galaxy down for it. That's not nothing, Kalen." Cade thinks that's the exact quality the system was built to recognize. Kalen looked down at his hands, at the faint burn scars still visible along his forearm. "I don't want to be a weapon." "I know." Chen's voice softened. "For what it's worth, I don't think that's what it's making you into. I think it's making you a translator, something that can speak to it, so the rest of us don't have to guess what it wants." Before Kalen could answer, the lights in the lab flickered. Once, and every monitor in the room went dark simultaneously, replaced a heartbeat later by a single alert scrolling across every screen at once. "Long-range sensor array, multiple contacts, Dominion fleet advancing, full formation, weapons hot." Chen's hand froze over her keyboard. "That's not the recon fleet." Kalen was already on his feet, the strange hum from the interface chamber returning faintly beneath the floor, as if the ship itself had felt the fleet coming before the sensors confirmed it. "That's Threknal," he said quietly. "He's not testing the line anymore." The alert on the screen updated once more, the number of confirmed contacts climbing higher with every passing second, and somewhere far below them, deep in the ship's hull, the ancient interface began to hum louder than it ever had before. The Dominion fleet came out of the dark like a wall, 60 ships strong, and Voss watched the tactical display fill with red icons faster than her mind wanted to process them. Overseer Threknal Voss leading from the front again. Her tactical officer reported, voice tight. "Full offensive formation. No hailing signal, no demands. He's not here to negotiate, Commander." He's here to prove a point, Voss said quietly. To himself, more than anyone else. She thought of Cade's words from the corridor. They've forgotten what happens when this planet finally stops being patient. And understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that the choice she'd made in Part 1, standing over a dying scout ship, had never really been about that scout ship at all. It had been about buying exactly this moment, whether she'd known it consciously or not. All ships defensive posture only, she ordered. We hold the line. We do not fire first. Commander, with respect, 60 warships. I heard you the first time. Hold the line. Threknall watched Earth's fleet arrange itself in a shape that made no tactical sense to him. Not an aggressive formation, not even a purely defensive one, but something almost like a shield thrown up around a handful of civilian evacuation transports, still completing their final jumps to safety. They're still moving people, Osara said, disbelief coloring her voice. Overseer, in the middle of an active fleet engagement, they are prioritizing civilian evacuation over combat positioning. Then we make them pay for that priority, Threknall said, though something in his chest didn't quite believe the words as he said them anymore. He had read the Terra Prima archive 3 times now. He knew on some level he didn't want to examine too closely exactly what kind of mistake he might be repeating. But 300 years of Dominion doctrine did not bend easily, not even in the face of doubt. And doubt itself felt like exactly the weakness Threknall had spent his entire career being taught to despise. Fire, he said. Concentrate on their forward transports. Break their formation. The Dominion fleet's opening volley tore into the space between the two forces, and for the first time since the war began, human ships returned fire. Not to conquer, not to punish, but simply to survive long enough to finish getting their people out. Kalen felt the battle before he saw it. A pressure building behind his eyes that had nothing to do with fear, and everything to do with the thing humming beneath the ship's hull, growing louder with every weapon discharged above it. It's responding to the fighting, he said, gripping the edge of the console as the whole chamber seemed to vibrate with the force of it. Dr. Chen, it's not just watching anymore. Chen was at his side in an instant, eyes scanning the cascading readouts. Kalen, I need you to stay calm, whatever happens next. Whatever you're feeling right now, don't fight it and don't force it either, just... The ship shuddered under a direct hit somewhere above them, alarms screaming through the corridor, and Kalen's hand pressed flat against the interface plate before he consciously decided to do it, the ancient symbols flaring bright gold under his palm. Far above, on the surface of the battle, something began to change. Voss saw it first as a distortion in the star field, subtle enough that she almost dismissed it as sensor damage from the incoming fire. Then the distortion spread, rippling outward from a point in space behind the human line. And every screen on her bridge went white for half a second, before resolving into a reading none of her officers had ever seen before. Commander, her sensor officer said, voice barely above a whisper. Whatever's out there, it's not one signature. It's thousands. Small, fast, spreading across our entire formation like a net. On the main view screen, the Dominion fleet's advance began to falter, not from damage but from what looked, impossibly, like hesitation, dozens of ships breaking formation as their own sensors registered the same impossible bloom of contacts surrounding them on every side. Threknall's voice came through on an open channel Voss hadn't authorized, raw with something she'd never expected to hear from him. Human Commander, whatever you have just done, call it off. I am ordering my fleet to withdraw. Voss's hand hovered over the comm control, and in that moment she understood, with a certainty that settled deep in her chest, that this was not something she had done at all. I haven't given any order, she said. Overseer, whatever you're seeing out there, it isn't mine to call off. 3 decks below, Kalen stood at the center of a chamber gone entirely gold with light, and for the first time since he'd touched the interface, he wasn't afraid of it. He understood, in a way he couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't felt it, that the thing waking up around him wasn't angry. It was old and patient, and it had been waiting 900 years for someone to finally need it enough to ask. Not yet, he found himself thinking, though he couldn't have said whether the thought was entirely his own, not unless they force it. Above him, on every Dominion sensor screen in the fleet, the thousands of contacts surrounding Threcknell's ships did not fire a single shot. They simply held position, an impossible wall of presence with no visible weapons, no comm traffic, no demands. And somehow, that silence was more terrifying to every Caldron commander watching it than any barrage could have been. Osara stood frozen at her station, staring at the reading, and finally spoke the words that had been sitting in the deep archive for 900 years, waiting for someone brave enough to say them aloud. Overseer, this is exactly what the old records describe. This is the moment before the mercy. Threcknell's claws dug into the armrest of his chair hard enough to draw blood he didn't feel. Full retreat, he said, voice barely steady. All ships, immediate withdrawal. Do not fire. Do not provoke them further. The Dominion fleet began pulling back, ship by ship, the golden field of presence surrounding them parting just enough to let them go. And Voss, watching it all from her bridge, felt something she hadn't expected to feel in the middle of what should have been a victory. She felt afraid not of the Dominion but of what her own species had just chosen, without her authorization, to become again. The retreat wasn't clean. A single Dominion cruiser near the rear of the formation, either panicking or acting on orders from an officer who hadn't heard the withdrawal command in time, opened fire on the nearest human transport. The very ship Kalen's mother had boarded during the evacuation drills 3 days earlier, still completing repairs from the earlier assault. The transport's shields failed on the second hit. Kalen felt it happen before anyone told him, a spike of grief and fury that wasn't only his own tearing through the golden light around him, and for one terrible second, the ancient system's presence around the Dominion fleet shifted, tightened, thousands of contacts converging inward with a speed that made Threcknell's bridge crew scream warnings no one had time to act on. Kalen! Chen's voice cut through the chamber, sharp with fear. Kalen, listen to me. Whatever you're feeling right now, you cannot let it decide what happens next. Do you understand me? You cannot let it decide. Tears streaming down his face, hands shaking against the interface plate. Kalen fought against the grief roaring through him, against every instinct screaming for the retribution 900 years of patience had been holding back. On the bridge above, Threcknell Voss watched his tactical display fill with a formation of impossible power, drawing a tightening circle around his entire fleet, and understood, in the space of a single heartbeat, that whatever came next was no longer his choice to make. The golden contacts stopped, frozen mid-advance, close enough now that every Dominion sensor screen showed nothing but light. And then, impossibly, they held. The light held for 11 seconds, and every person watching it on both sides of the line would later swear it felt like 11 years. Kalen fell to his knees inside the interface chamber, grief and rage still tearing through him like fire, and somewhere in the golden haze around him he felt the ancient system waiting. Not cold, not mechanical, but almost gentle, holding itself back the exact same way he was fighting to hold himself back, as if it understood the cost of what came next better than he did. It's not asking me to stop it, he realized, the thought arriving with a clarity that cut through the pain. It's asking me to choose, the same way someone chose 900 years ago. He thought of his mother's hands shaking in the kitchen doorway. He thought of New Halden burning below him and the words he'd heard on the observation deck. This is what her mercy bought us. And for the first time he understood they weren't a condemnation. They were a question nobody had been brave enough to answer honestly until now. Not like this, he said aloud, his voice breaking. Don't let them become the reason we forget who we are. The golden light around the Dominion fleet did not vanish. It simply softened, the tightening circle easing back into the wide, watchful presence it had held before the panicked cruiser fired, and on 60 Dominion bridges at once. Every crew member watched death withdraw its hand for a second time in 900 years. Threcknell Voss sat motionless in his command chair long after the golden field released his fleet, staring at a tactical display that had, for 11 seconds, shown him with absolute certainty exactly how his entire war would end if he pushed 1 inch further. Overseer, Osara's voice quiet, careful. Orders? He didn't answer right away. He was thinking of the redacted file he'd read 3 times, of the one line left untouched through 400 years of careful editing. They showed mercy once. It was not weakness. It was the last thing we ever regretted learning. He understood it now in a way that no translation could have taught him. Signal the human fleet, he finally said. Open channel. No weapons. When Voss's face appeared on his view screen, tired and wary and utterly unwilling to trust him, Threknall did something no Kaldrenic overseer had done in 300 years of Dominion history. He stood, and he bowed his head. I mistook your restraint for fear, he said. My people have made that mistake before, and buried the memory of what it cost us so deep that I did not recognize it happening again until it was almost too late a second time. I am formally withdrawing my fleet from human territory. I do not ask for your trust. I ask only that you allow us to leave. Voss studied him for a long moment, the weight of the entire war sitting behind her eyes. Nobody on my side fired first today, Overseer. Not because we were afraid to, because we've spent this whole war trying to prove that we didn't have to. She paused. Go home. Tell your people what almost happened here. Maybe next time somebody remembers the story before it costs a fleet to relearn it. 3 weeks later, Kalen stood on the observation deck of the same refugee ship where he'd watched New Halden burn. Except now the deck was crowded with people. Voss, Chen, Cade, Osara, sent under a fragile new diplomatic accord as the Dominion's first official liaison to Earth, and dozens of others who had lived through the 11 seconds that almost ended everything. You know, Chen said, coming to stand beside him. The interface hasn't gone fully dormant again. It's just quieter. Watching. I know. Kalen still felt it sometimes, a faint hum at the edge of awareness, patient in a way he was slowly learning to be patient too. I think it's waiting to see what we do with this, whether we deserve to keep being trusted with it. For what it's worth, Cade said, joining them. I think you already answered that question out there in that chamber. Better than any of us could have. Osara approached last, her Kaldrenic bearing still stiff and unfamiliar in the human-designed corridor, and inclined her head to Kalen in a gesture Chen's research suggested was the closest her species came to genuine respect. I have spent 400 years reading warnings about your kind, human. Warnings that called your mercy a trap, your patience a weakness waiting to be exploited. I no longer believe that translation was accurate. What do you think it actually means then? Kalen asked. Osara considered the question with the same careful precision she brought to everything. I think it means you are the only species we have ever encountered who could have destroyed us today, and chose instead to make sure we understood why you didn't. Voss watched the exchange from a few steps away, and found herself thinking of that first moment, standing on her bridge with a dying scout ship on her screen, certain she was making the hardest decision of her career. She hadn't known then that it was only the first of many. She hadn't known it would take a 17-year-old boy's grief and restraint, in a chamber 3 decks below a battlefield, to prove that the decision had been right all along. She walked over and stood beside Kalen at the viewport, looking out at the stars, at the quiet border between human space and everything beyond it that had, for 900 years, been protected by nothing more than a species willing to be patient. Your mother would be proud of what you did up there, she said. Kalen didn't answer right away. He was thinking of New Halden, of the burning sky, of 11 seconds that could have ended everything, and of a golden light that had waited for him to choose who humanity would be. I just didn't want to become the thing that took her from me, he finally said. I think that's all it ever was. Not strength, not some ancient weapon, just people, choosing, over and over, not to become what almost destroyed them once. Voss nodded slowly, and for the first time since the war began, allowed herself something close to peace. Far below the ship, deep beneath Earth's oldest ocean, the ancient system settled back into its long, patient watch. Not sleeping, not truly, but simply waiting, the way it always had, for however long it took the galaxy beyond to finally understand what humanity had known about itself all along. Mercy had never been their weakness. It had always, quietly, been their strength.